Good morning, everybody. Welcome back to Professional Writing. I'm Professor Mike, and today we're going to talk about writing an effective introduction to your academic paper. So I'm going to go through all the parts of an introduction, everything that you need to include in your introduction to effectively introduce your research to your reader. Later on, I want to also go through a few writing tips, basically. I want to go through some introductory phrases, the proper use of using synonyms, to make, to avoid repetition and so on, okay? I want to also say thank you very much for everybody who has submitted an abstract. Your abstracts are amazing, okay? Just always keep in mind the 5 parts of the abstract. And in fact, I'm just going to go over and remind you, in case you have not sent in an abstract, just to keep it in mind all the 5 parts that you need to include, okay? Also, don't forget the title and the keywords. Very, very important, okay? I also didn't mention before, I don't know why, I probably got caught up in other things. With regards to your keywords, try to include all of them in your abstract, okay? Your keywords cannot be different from your abstract, okay? All the keywords should be generally shown somewhere in, inside your abstract as well, okay? You may not include all of them, okay? If you have only 5 or 6 or 4 keywords, that's fine. But try to include at least, 75% or 80%, like 5 out of 6, 4 out of 5 of the keywords somewhere in your abstract. Okay, I'm going to go over to the PowerPoint presentation. I'm just going to quickly review the parts of the abstract, and then I'm going to jump into the introduction. Okay, so try to remember this. Like when you write an abstract, always keep in mind that you're going to have a purpose and a motivation. Okay, so why are you studying this problem? What is the problem exactly? Okay. And then it's kind of like a mini version of your paper. You're going to include the methods that you used, okay? For example, CRISPR, okay, next generation sequencing, some database, anything like that. Also your results, okay? Whether they're good or whether they're bad, what your results were. You can put that in one sentence, okay? You do not need to include any discussion here whatsoever, okay? Your discussion is going to be a part of your paper and not part of your abstract. And then finally, you're also going to summarize everything in one sentence, maybe 2 sentences, a conclusion, okay? So whether there are, the implications of your research and whether or not further research is still required or not, okay? As well, you're concluding everything here, okay? So did you actually answer your question, your problem statement, okay? Your hypothesis. Okay, so today though, I want to look at the introduction. I'm going to show you another video by Kevin, okay? Kevin is, again, Kevin from Wordiness is amazing at, talking about, parts of a research paper. And he gives a lecture, or you will see a lecture by him later on. He's going to talk about the relevant parts that you need to include in your introduction. So remember, your introduction, it should establish the context of the research, okay? So that's your, the topic basically, okay? So we know exactly, what the problem statement is, okay? The purpose and motivation, but this is the primary purpose of what an introduction does. It's what its function is. You need to include background information, okay? So what we know on the topic, okay? And we also need to talk about the past, okay? So the existing literature, okay? Any kind of research that supports your findings as well. So in a way, okay, your hypothesis is your introduction is kind of like the abstract, Okay, you're going to have the purpose of your work. So you're going to talk about your thesis statement, your hypothesis right here. Okay, you also need to answer some of these questions. Like, for example, why is it important, to be researching this topic, to be discussing this topic? Okay, like, what did we know about it before, and what do we know about it now? Okay, so maybe your topic has been researched for many years. It's an ongoing, either an ongoing problem, and, maybe in the past, this is what was found out, and this is what we are discovering these days in current research. Okay, you can also talk about the benefits, the advantages to the reader, okay, or the world, okay. How does it advance, the advances in technology and science as well. Actually, yeah, if you see here, I've got a remark. See the next slide. Okay, so here, focus on your research. Okay, so you need to also talk about any gaps in knowledge. So that means that if you're researching cancer, for example, okay, cancer, again, this is a topic that's ongoing. We can talk about the technology that we have now that maybe they didn't have in the past, okay? So that perhaps we're saving more lives now from, what we learned in the past, and as well as the technological advances. Okay, even still, there were changes in the world and the environment. Okay, so if you're a geologist, a geographer, anything like that, maybe, like climate change, if you're studying the environment and ecology, of course. So in the past, when those studies were performed, okay, they had different limitations, or maybe they didn't even have any limitations that we have now. So the last thing that we can, do, the final thing, or the final step basically, is that we can introduce our research, okay? So we've talked about existing literature, we've talked about, the gaps in knowledge and different technologies, different times and things like that. We've introduced our hypothesis, okay? We've explained to the reader the importance of our research. Now we can get right into it. We can start going, we can start with our methods and materials, our methodology, results, discussion, and so on. Okay, so here are some ways, like, as a final sentence in your introduction, we can say the aim of the paper is to give, this is a good word too, I like aim. You can also say objective, okay? Objective is a great word. We can say this study was designed, okay, or developed to evaluate, to compare, to assess, okay? And of course, the primary focus of this paper is, okay, well, is on the topic of whatever your topic is, okay? So you need to just fill in the blank there. Okay, so I'm just going to play the video from Kevin's lecture, basically on how to write an effective introduction. In this lecture, actually, he talks about the importance of an introduction and a discussion, okay? Later on, I'm going to show you the other half of his lecture about discussions and, how to effectively write a discussion.
So the question you might have is, why are we focusing only on the introduction and discussion sections today? But the reason why the introduction and discussion sections are so important is that they have such a large combined word count, and they're such a large section. So that means there's a lot of English involved, like a lot of sentences and not only results and details, but a lot of argumentation and citing literature, etc. And they actually are so important because they summarize the study and explain the importance. The introduction is the first part of the paper after the abstract that any sort of researcher is going to read. And if they lose interest or if they don't understand your introduction, they're not going to continue. So as I said, they're the most prone to language errors and difficulties, especially for ESL writers. So the purpose of today's lecture is to help you spot some of the errors in these sections and to focus on how you can structure these sections within a social science and humanities paper.
Okay, so I'm just going to pause them for a second there. Okay, so you can actually see, hang on, maybe I should go back a second. Oh, what have I done? Hang on a second there. Okay, then.
Etc.
All right, so you can see right here that the discussion and the introduction, okay, oh, sorry, I'm pointing at the wrong one. Together, they have the largest. They are the largest sections of your paper, especially by word count. Okay, so the introduction, you know, summarizes previous studies, whereas the discussion will summarize the study itself. You know, and of course, place it. You know, explain its importance and place in the field of study. Okay, and the wider domain. Okay, because your work is important now. And, you know, for future researchers, okay, so for the next researcher, you know, think about it. Like you're writing it today in October 2020. Think about October 2030, okay? Things are going to be different then. Some other researcher is going to Google your work and your name is going to come up in your paper. And you need to explain, you know, why was it so important then in 2020 at that time while you were, you know, when you were researching this this topic. Okay, let me go on here.
And they actually are so important because they summarize the study for ESL writers.
Okay.
So the purpose of today's lecture is to help you spot some of the errors in these sections and to focus on how you can structure these sections within a social science and humanities paper. Okay, so looking at the anatomy of the paper, this is a regular scientific paper, hard sciences. You can see in the introduction, it goes from broad information, answering the questions, what is known, what do we know about this subject, to what is unknown. So what kinds of questions is this study going to answer? And finally, we have the hypothesis. Moving forward, we have the results and then the...
Okay, isn't that amazing? So your introduction, okay, you know, holds all of these things here. What is known, what is unknown, and how do we fill in the gaps, okay? Just as I said in the PowerPoint there, you know, those gaps in the knowledge, okay? Something was known before or something was unknown before, but now we know it, and or now we're trying to discover it or find the answer and solution. Okay, so we're filling in those gaps.
Discussion and conclusion where the information is brought again. So the general humanities and most social science papers look a little bit different. And I want you to keep in mind throughout this lecture that I'm not focusing on any one area of study. So it could be psychology, sociology, history, literature. There's a little different structure for every area, right? So this is just a general guide. But in general humanities, the introduction encompasses a lot of literature, and even the body can be, you're not focusing on an experiment or a study per se, but you're incorporating a huge body of literature. So all of the tips I give you today can also be applied to the body because they're mostly language tips and grammar and style. Okay, let's start with the general theme of this lecture, which is the common writing mistakes that ESL researchers make. And there is a lot. So,
okay, so pay attention to this, okay? This is not just for the introduction, but for all, you know, all parts of a research paper or just writing anything in general. So here are the most common najčastější chyby, okay, that researchers make.
We're not going to look at every single one. We're going to divide them into 4 categories. The first category is wordiness. And this can include, this means too many words, right? When the reader is reading your paper, if there's too many words used, it can make it not as readable. Or you can overuse you can use too many terms so that your paper doesn't fit in the journal. And this includes passive voice, prepositional phrases, and nominalizations, which we will discuss later. Another common writing category issue is irrelevant or redundant information. This means repeating the same words, repeating the same information, or putting information in the wrong section.
Okay, so that's extremely important. Okay, if you remember grammar school at the beginning of our very first lesson, actually, okay, your information needs to be, like structured, okay, so that the reader can look at just the topic sentences and then have an idea of what your research is and, what they can expect in each paragraph. Okay, later on, I'm going to talk about things like repeating words, okay, and especially about these prepositional phrases. Either you use too many or you don't use them properly, okay, that's what happens quite often.
Putting the methods in the results, or putting the results in the introduction. Another category of writing issues is vocabulary. This includes using non-academic language, colloquialisms, incorrect terms. And as ESL students, I know it's very difficult to know exactly what is the right term, right? Because there's many words in the English language, and there's no way to memorize every single one. But I'll give you some tips for that. And finally, unnatural or awkward phrasing. So this can include grammar and style issues. I've lumped all these together. So any way that your sentences don't really make sense, and that can make the writing unclear. As an editor, sometimes when I'm editing, there's sentences that I don't understand what the writer means, and that's very difficult for me to edit. So before giving your work to an editor, you need to make sure that your work is at least clear.
Okay, so I showed you a video, was it last week? I can't remember. But anyways, again, it was Grammar Squirrel on the clarity in writing, okay? So with the aerosols, okay? Things like that. You need to be very specific. So when you do your edit, you have to go through all these, the syntax, okay? Meaning you have to look at the expressions that you use, that you have written down, and make sure that the readers can understand every word, okay? Remember, you might be a PhD student, but the person, reading your paper might be still in high school, or, maybe even in grammar school. Okay, so, you want everything to be in simple black and white terms, okay, for the reader to understand. So they might be very new to your field, okay? So the words, the terminology, all the syntax has to be very simple and clear for everybody, whether you are 60 years old, 70 years old, you've been a professor for 50 years, or you're just, a first-year student at Prefug.
The editor can change the work so it's more readable and nicer and academic, but if it's not clear, there's nothing they can do to your work without changing it, right? So you want to make sure that your work makes sense. Okay, so let's look first at the introduction section. The purpose of the introduction is to basically establish the context and answer the questions, why are you doing this work? What is the background information about the study? What is the relevant primary research? So literature review is put in the introduction. You're also going to state the purpose of the work, the hypothesis, research question. In the humanities and social sciences, this can be kind of all over the place, right? Sometimes it's at the end of the first or second paragraph. Sometimes it's at the end of the introduction. But the point is that you need to make the hypothesis clear, and I'm going to show you some simple template phrases that you can use to clarify your hypothesis or your thesis statement if you're in the humanities. So you're going to answer these questions. Make sure that if a reader is reading it, they understand, they can answer these 4 questions. What are you studying? Why is it important? What's the point of it? How does it apply to the rest of your area or to other areas? What did we know before the study? So that's the literature. What information do we already know? And how does this study advance our knowledge? So most papers, I have my graduate degree in literature, and it's very common for lit students to just kind of show what they know. And that's what you're doing here. You're showing what you know, but you also have to point the reader in the direction of how your thesis adds to what we already know. So that's very important in the introduction. You're not only just repeating information that other people have written.
Yeah, absolutely important. Okay, so your work is different. Okay, so you're expanding on previous work. Okay, and you know, it's again, you know, how does it add to existing knowledge?
Okay, so some general style guidelines going forward. You might have heard to use the active voice, especially true in humanities and social sciences. So you don't have to use it all the time, but overuse of passive voice can add to your words and make it kind of clunky. So
that's an interesting statement, okay? You know, in the past, when I grew up, you know, I'm not a scientist, but I had to study, you know, science and chemistry and physics when I was in school as well. And I also had to write really long, boring papers. And basically, we were always told, you know, only use the passive voice. Never, you know, never say I and things like that, okay? So here's, for example, you know, we can say things like this, like previous studies in this area have reported, okay? Instead of have been reported, okay? This is great, actually, okay? This is the active voice. This is the passive voice. Trpni rod, have been reported. Trpni rod, prepritomni čas. And here's čini rod, okay? Prepritomni čas, okay? This is great because we're not using, you know, a personal pronoun, okay? Osobné zámeno. Previous studies, well, this is the osobné zámeno, but we're not using it or they, okay? Instead, we're actually identifying what, you know, what reported the results, okay? Now, for example, here, you know, we sought to determine, okay? This is the personal pronoun, we. Well, you know, I also really don't like it, you know, and a lot of people don't like it. You know, it's almost too personal. Okay, so you can, you know, change it to our study, sought. Sought is minuli čas, seek, hledat, okay, to search, okay. So we searched and we sought, okay, to seek and to sought, okay, to determine something. Okay, so you can say our study or our team, you know, our group, and so on. Okay, sought to determine something.
For example, instead of XYZ results have been reported by nation. That is what we already know. Why is it important? So you don't need to go into specifics of your study, but you can use concrete details to show the reader why your study is relevant and timely and important. So when you're writing an introduction, you can actually think of it as going backwards, starting with the specific purpose and then deciding what the context is that you're asking. So when you're actually creating it, this is not when you're writing it, but when you're thinking about how to create it, you have a purpose statement first, right? The purpose of this study is to determine the satisfaction rate of high school students in New York.
Okay, I love it. Okay, it's right there, the purpose of the study. Okay, great way to introduce the purpose statement. Okay, why did we study it?
So that's basically the objective of your study, for example. So for the beginning of your introduction, you might include statements that introduce this. So you begin, several recent studies have demonstrated that satisfaction rates impact student performance. Many factors can affect high school student satisfaction rates. Between 1995 and 2011, over 2 million high school students dropped out of American public schools.
Wonderful way, okay? So we can talk about the previous literature, the previous studies that we've, you know, or the existing research, okay? We use the present perfect, have demonstrated, okay? Od minule, you know, do teraz, from the past, okay, to the present, okay, we can use the present perfect in this case. Also, we can talk about factors, like, okay, so many factors can affect high school student satisfaction, Okay, or again, you know, something that's happened between two dates, okay? So over 2 million high school students dropped out. This is simple past, minuli čas jednoduchý. Okay, so that, well, you know, it's 2020 right now, so we're talking about finished time, okay?
So you're showing the urgency, you're showing the importance of your purpose statement first by setting the background. This is just an example, right? And as we move forward, by the way, if you see a lot of the text that's in green.
Okay, I'm just going to fast forward it a little bit. Yeah, right there. Okay, have a look here.
Background and topic. You move towards literature and current knowledge, and then finally you give your...
Okay, so it's a triangle. You introduce it here. So what we know, our understanding, you know, of the world and the topic, you know, within the world. Okay, what's the gap we want to fill? Okay, and then finally we're coming, you know, how and why are we going to fill it? This is our purpose hypothesis statement. Okay, and then we can go ahead and introduce our topic.
Hypothesis or your specific purpose. Okay, so let's move. I want to break down the introduction and discussion by function, by not really sections, not by paragraph, but by function. So each, right here we have 1A. 1A can mean one paragraph or two paragraphs. It doesn't mean it's just one paragraph. But at the beginning of your introduction, you should introduce your topic and its importance.
Okay, exactly. All right. So we got all our background information there, 30% of something, or it's a leading cause of death or something like that. Okay, who's affected by it and so on. Okay, so we've got our purpose there. Okay. All right, let's move on to, here's a good one.
Use to show the importance of a topic.
Okay. So these are all the verbs. These are great verbs, you know, just as Kevin said, to show the importance of the topic. Affect, like population affected. Impact, this is a great word. If you can see it right here, I'll get my finger in there. Impact, dopad, okay? So the effect, the impact, okay? Cause, you know, or leads to, and so on.
These are called power verbs too, sometimes. So, for example, at least 14 specific conditions of mental illness are linked to trauma in early adolescence. Foreclosure impacts over 1 million per year worldwide annually. So you can see the power terms are in green. So instead of just using is or are or linking verbs, you can use these more powerful verbs that catch the reader's eye and really make your sentences more impactful. In this section, you want to use more compelling language, and verbs are part of that. So again, active verbs and details. So when you have the details, always better to use them.
This is a great word, compelling, okay? Compelling is kind of like attractive, okay? It's, you know, it's interesting, of course, but when something is compelling, you know, it's stimulating. I guess that's the word you want, okay? It stimulates thinking and thought.
Let's look at an example of a less interesting sentence. So we're zooming in on the level of the sentence now. A major cause of poverty in the U.S. is lack of education. So I've highlighted is here. How can we improve this sentence? Well, one way is to just add more details and add a more interesting active verb. So a major cause of poverty, instead of that, we can be specific. Nearly 25 million impoverished children attend underfunded schools. That kind of fact is not only more academic, because you're giving actual evidence in details, but it's more interesting to read. Okay, let's look at another one. A significant percentage of older people in the U.S. have psychological disorders. There's nothing wrong with this, by the way. If you don't know what the percentage is, this is fine. But if you happen to know more information, you can include that here. Be more specific. Major depression afflicts an estimated 10% of American adults over age.
You know, Kevin makes a really good point here, okay? There is nothing wrong with that, but if you do know, you know, or approximately know, like here, an estimated 10% of American adults, if you do know the information, the reader is more, it's more interesting for the reader when they have such a fact, okay, that they know that, oh, wow, 10% of American adults over 50, you know, they're afflicted, okay, to be afflicted, or in this case, this is an active verb, major depression afflicts, okay, to afflict, it means, well, it's a very negative verb, first of all. I don't know how to say it in Slovak or in French, but in English, an affliction, it means that you have been affected negatively by something. And in this case, it gives a negative effect, or major depression, you know, causes, you know, 10% of American adults over 50, you know, to have this depression. Depression is negative, so we can use an affliction or afflicts with it.
Page 50. So you're showing the importance in both of these sentences here, but in this one you're kind of narrowing the scope, and you're narrowing your topic a little bit to major depression. So in fact, you could actually use this as a first sentence, and okay, the keywords are in red and the concrete details are in green.
Okay.
So the title of this paper is Disability Status, Housing Tenure, and Residential Attainment in Metropolitan America. So let's say the keywords here are disability, residential attainment, housing discrimination. Maybe there's different keywords, but if these are the keywords.
Okay, so just as I said, you know, at least here in the title, you know, he's got two of them here. This one, housing discrimination, is not in the title, but that's, you know, it's not too bad though. But in your abstract especially, try to use your keywords in your abstract, okay, all of them. Then the author should mention as many related keywords as possible right away in the beginning. And this applies, by the way, to the abstract as well. So the introduction and the abstract have a lot in common when it comes to these key terms, because when you're searching on a database, you should be able to find your paper using the key terms. So you can see that these terms are related: disability, housing, residential related, fair housing amendments, discrimination, housing sales, rentals. So this author doesn't actually use the exact keywords, but maybe in the next paragraph they use them more specifically. But you'll notice that there's a lot of concrete details. This is an actual paper, by the way. Okay, so I'm just going to speed it up. I don't want to go on and on. You know, these lectures aren't all about him as well. So, but he uses, you know, he says it's very important though. Okay, use those concrete details. Okay, yeah, concrete, specific. Okay, but this one here, like in 2010, we know the year, we know how many people, we know the year, we know the percent. Okay, so you can see all these years and so forth. Okay. Put them in, you know, and most of them are accompanied, you know, with these key words here, okay? That I pulled up. So we have all these green keywords, or use the form phrases to guide your writing. Okay, so you're going to, establish the context by providing a brief and balanced review of literature. So now we're moving on to the literature review. In some humanities and social sciences, the literature is placed all throughout the writing as well. So this can apply to wherever you use the literature to. All right then, so have a look here. Whoa. So again, just imagine what a sentence would be like. It's difficult to see all this in context. So look at here, okay? So you're going to use this type of citation here where you have the author, et al., you know, this is the Latin for, you know, the other authors, his team, and you're going to have the year. If you want, you have to introduce, or you have to, yeah, I guess you have to present the existing literature. And this is a great way to do it. The motivations of this research and importance stems, okay? This is a great word, stems, or derived, okay? Stem is like from the plant, okay? So you have the, you know, I'm using my hand here. It would be probably better to show you on the blackboard. But just imagine a flower, And the stem, the stone, okay, so it sprouts or it grows from several existing studies. Okay, here's another one. Okay, this paper marks the introductory application of the DPNAR model of Richard et al. Okay, Morris et al. Okay. Or this contribution is important as many authors, blah, 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 like Lizier, Bartholow, and so on, they point out, another great word, point out, demonstrate, indicate. Okay, let's move on here. Let me find the arrow. Okay, what do we got here? Oh, great.
Important to use an introductory phrase. Okay, here's a tip.
All right, so here's some more things here. So when we're talking about what's already known about the problem, okay, if there's not a lot of literature, a great way to introduce it is that there is a small but growing literature that addresses this issue, okay? By saying this, we're saying that, yeah, there are people who are, there are researchers interested in this topic, okay? So we can say that these guys here, they find that individuals, okay, White and Al concluded, you know, Hoffman and Livermore again, you know, these guys over here, okay? So this citation is right at the end, okay? Great ways to talk about, you know, what is already known.
Do not use lengthy explanations of the work. So using these form phrases, however, no research has examined disability status disparities. So we're showing what is missing. This is kind of the link between what is known and what your study does. So showing what is missing.
So here is our gap, okay, that medzera, okay? So this is a social sciences or sociology paper, basically. And so Kevin is giving you the you know, some tips on how to, you know, introduce, you know, what is absent, you know. So for example, no research has examined disability status, you know, disparities by housing tenure. This is a little bit complicated, okay, but it's a great way to talk.
Because the author is going to wonder, what information do I need to know before I read your study? So no research has examined this. That means that your study might be the one to examine this information. Additionally, in the rental market, interactions are quick and rental ratios.
Okay, so yeah, we're getting into, like, you know, this is these signposting, okay? So additionally is a great word, you know, to, instead of saying besides, I don't like besides, okay? You know, okrem toho, okay? Try to use additionally or in addition, okay, in the rental market. Interactions are quick and so forth. Okay, let me see here if I can move on. Yeah, I want to go right over here. So here are form phrases or prepositional phrases, as they're sometimes called, okay?
And here X means whatever your study is doing or whatever you want to argue is.
Okay, you know what, I'm just going to leave it at this, okay, because later on I'm going to show you some, you know, how to use these types of prepositional phrases, introductory phrases, you know, all the words that you need, such as however, therefore, thus, you know, additionally, and so on. Now, I'm going to send that in a different lesson. Okay, just going to go back to the Okay, so I hope that video was helpful to you, at least. So keep that in mind when when you write your introduction. Always have the background information, the previous literature. It's very similar to your abstract. Okay, so what is known about the problem? What are some of the gaps that need to be filled in? What are you doing at this moment to fill in these gaps? Okay. You know, of course, the previous literature, the other authors, okay, because, you know, those authors, you know, they have an impact on your work, okay? So you're not repeating what they did, you're expanding on it, you're adding to it, okay? And then you can finally, you know, introduce your your research, you know, your paper, okay? So you can either go on by explaining, you know, giving an outline, you know, of all the sections of your paper, you know, what the reader can expect, and basically it lends that structure to your paper as well, okay? And then you can go right into your methods and materials and results and so forth, okay? So try to always keep in mind that the introduction and the discussion, as Kevin said, they have the highest word count, okay? You know, because your introduction is explaining the background, the present situation, the future implications. It's introducing the topic, your purpose, your problem, okay? Explaining to the reader what you are going to read, okay? But don't put anything else. You don't actually have to put the results into the introduction, okay? Leave that for the results section, okay? Your discussion section, we're going to get to that I think we'll do it next week. Why not? Okay. So the discussion section, again, it's, you know, you're recapitulating what you introduced, okay? And you're making all those connections and links that you talked about previously in your introduction. Okay. This week I'm sending you a handout. You don't have to, there's no exercises involved in it. But basically, there are just academic writing tips and useful phrases, okay, that might help you in your writing. And I just want to go over some of them quickly. All right, then. So you're going to, in your attachment section here, okay, so I've got all these great, you know, like tips with useful phrases and things like that. Yeah, it says you can, you know, tick them off if you agree, if you don't agree, or anything like that. But that's up to you though, okay? I just want to go through a few things so that, you know, we've already discussed today. So for example, you know, start the introduction by answering the question which you have been set. Okay, so maybe your supervisor has given it to you, or you've decided, right? You've set it yourself. Start the introduction by setting the background to the question that you've been set, like in our globalized society. Here are great words over the last few years, okay? I hear a lot in the last decades, in the last years, but this is even better, over, okay? It's another way of saying during, okay? Or we can say for many people in modern society and according to, and so on. I'll let you read that yourself though. Okay, so also in the middle part of your introduction, okay, so you need to paraphrase that question, okay? You know, so for example, however, is really true that, or this paper aims to judge the real influence of it, okay? Or it is not, however, been conclusively shown, okay? So, for example, in previous literature, they, you know, tried to examine the problem, but, you know, they didn't really come up with any concrete or specific answer. Okay. And then again, okay, so you're going to, just as I said a few minutes ago, you also need to set out the structure of the body, okay? So you're going to talk about what you're going to talk about, okay? You're basically going to introduce, you know, tell the reader what they're going to read, okay? You're going to list some of the advantages and disadvantages below, okay? Oh, sorry, I will look at the advantages and disadvantages of this approach below, or the reasons are given below, meaning that the reader will see everything below the introduction in the methods and the materials. Or this essay will look at the advantages and disadvantages. Okay, this essay will examine, will compare, will assess, and so on. Okay, so here are some wonderful, useful phrases. Okay, these are the types of phrases that are going to go from your last sentence in the previous paragraph to the first sentence in the following paragraph, okay? So your first paragraph of the body of writing, you can start with first or first of all, okay? This is the first saying that we're talking about. You start the first paragraph with expressions for changing the topic, as for, or turning our attention to, okay, or moving on to. So when we're going, from one topic to another, this is a transitional paragraph, okay? We can also, with our topic phrases, right? Looking at this, or if we look at this, or on the topic of this, okay? Remember, when we're ordering things, okay, we can say first, firstly, second, secondly, third, thirdly, okay, and so on. And then if we're, ending, like a number-based expression, well, it's not going to be number-based, but if we're ending the order of succession, then we can say finally, or lastly, or last of all, okay? And here are the linking expressions, however, therefore, in addition, and so on. Okay, so you got all of that kind of stuff there. And the second page, remember, on the other hand, never on the other side, never on the other side. Na druge strane. On the other side means, posmrti, v nebi, okay, in heaven. All right, these are all contrast, okay? So however also means on the other hand, in contrast or on the contrary. We can also, try to avoid these abbreviations, okay? That can be very, very confusing if you have many of them, okay? If you have so many, I'm like, trying to read it. What does this mean again? And so on. Just as Kevin said, you have to do an edit for clarity, okay? So some jargon and foreign expressions that the reader won't understand, just don't even use it or try to find another word. You have to keep in mind that the reader, okay, might be new to the topic, might still be, in high school or first year university. Okay, maybe first year PhD as well, and the whole field is very different for that person. Okay, let's have a look here. This is also extremely important because we don't like repeating words, and many professors and students send me a paper for proofreading, a correctura, and they're like, well, I have only one word for this. Can you try to make it spicy for me? Try to, give it some, I don't know, make it interesting and find some other words that will help the paper. Okay. So you have to rephrase as much as possible. So for example, important. But time to time, use this word vital or crucial or essential. Okay. For example, you have here problem. Okay. Problem can be issue. Issue is problematica. Okay. Or a barrier. Okay. It's a prekažka. Okay. And so on. Okay, so, the same thing goes with the jargon, okay, using the expressions like the climate or weather, okay, or weather systems, okay. Try to, use different words and jargon just to make it more interesting. Okay, again, this is great stuff when you use brackets and quotation marks, okay, or underlining, and capital letters. It's wonderful if you want to, show the importance of a word or an expression. All right. And also when you're going to emphasize, when you're going to, like dôrazniť, please note that. Okay. Or it is important to note. Okay. NB is not bad. Okay. But I prefer these ones here. Please note that, or it is important to note, okay? And so on. Use your examples as well, okay? So you have to, for example, when you're supporting your arguments, okay? E.g., example given, okay? A good example of this is quotations or according to podla, soho, toho or podlaneho logical arguments, okay? For example, it inevitably, okay, causes, okay, something, okay, and so on. So these are all great ways that you can look at it, okay? Referencing, okay, again, okay, so you can usually choose any kind of system that you want, okay, but best check with the publisher, check with some of their previous or some of their publications that already exist. So you can use either the number system here, okay, numbers in square brackets. You can use the family name, which is very popular, like Smith, 1976, okay, direct quoting, okay, quoting directly. Smith, in 2001 wrote that, okay, is always better than Smith believed that. So, I think you guys are already quite good with that too. Okay, you have some stuff on punctuation. I'm going to go through that in another lesson. And finally, of course, ending academic writing tips. So like your final paragraph can be a summary of the information given in the body of the writing. So to summarize the information given above, okay, and or a conclusion leading on from the information given in the body. So although I've shown both benefits and drawbacks, nevihodi, to this approach, I believe that for most people, the most important factor is, and therefore the pros, right, the pluses outweigh, okay, they're heavier, they're more than the pros outweigh the cons, okay. Con, I know this word in French, it's a bad word, les cons, but in English, cons are negatives, okay, things like that, okay. So just to finish off here, it's okay to avoid any clear conclusion in your writing. So as I've shown above, there are both arguments for and against this course of action, and which is better depends on the circumstances. Yes, that's okay, but if you have a clear conclusion, I would avoid this. You don't want to be neutral, okay? If you know, for example, that your research shows something, and definitely you need to be biased, okay? There's nothing wrong with being biased in scientific research, okay? If your research answers your hypothesis, your problem statement, then by all means, don't be liberal, okay? Be as straightforward as possible. All right, guys, I'm just going to leave it at that for today then. Hopefully some of that was helpful. Actually, I really wanted to get into some more grammar, especially with the present perfect, the passive voice, and things like that, but I just don't have time for it today. Also, I don't want my lectures to be like full of different topics. Today, I just really wanted to focus on the introduction, okay? The stuff that you really need to include in the introduction of your paper, okay? Background, what is known, the previous literature, your problem statement, even your purpose, okay? So it includes that stuff that it's very similar to your abstract, except you're not going to talk about your results. You can introduce the methodology, of course, but you're not going to talk about your results or any discussion or anything like that, okay? And finally, at the end of your introduction doesn't need to be just one paragraph, okay? It can be 2 paragraphs, sometimes 3 paragraphs as well, okay? But remember, it's important because you're giving the foundation, the basics, the podkladi, okay, of your paper, okay? So the reader is looking at all this stuff. They see what the problem is, they see, they're reading, what has been studied and what kind of results maybe, or, negative results even that other authors, found when they were doing their research, okay? So they can see what the gaps in the knowledge are, you know, any kind of limitations that were in the past and, you know, new technology that's being introduced now. So if you have a new methodology like CRISPR or next generation sequencing that wasn't used like 30 years ago and therefore, you know, this was believed at that time, you know, in the past, okay? The reader is going to see all this and it's going to be interesting, you know, for them, okay? And also you're going to introduce the whole paper by, you know, giving a kind of a guide, you know, so, you know, this study reveals, okay? Remember, use the active voice, okay? Passive voice is great. You know, I love the passive voice too, but active voice sounds better. Just don't use I, you, he, okay? Never say that, okay? Even when you talk about, or when you refer to other authors, okay? Never say he or they. Strictly put in their name again, okay? So, Smith, 2011, blah, 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 okay? And talk about Smith again, okay? Don't say he did this, okay? He sounds too colloquial, okay? Hovorova angliština. And we want to avoid that in academic writing. All right. Next week, yeah, is your due date for the abstract. If you have any problems, of course, you know, send me an email. I'm very flexible, especially in these crazy times of coronavirus. Thank goodness that the rain has finally stopped, you know. But I heard it's going to start raining again tomorrow for a little bit. But, yeah, you know, what can we do? We can't do anything about the weather, okay? Anyways, good luck. You know, have a successful weekend. Stay healthy, everybody. And I'll see you guys all next time then. Okay? Bye-bye.